Okay, so one of the big things that I think really scares accountants off engaging in the migration space is they just don't quite know how to do it. They don't know the right questions to ask, they don't know where to start, and it can be quite baffling and confusing. My biggest piece of advice to you is to qualify. So when you're out there building your practice, and if you're considering building an implementation practice like I have done with Jody, we've built quite a successful and substantial business very quickly with a very defined and targeted approach and focus to our client base. But the one thing that I think has made us really successful in the marketplace is, it's a bit like real estate where you go location, location, location. It's no different in dealing with a client and figuring out what is the right system for them to use. You've got to qualify the customer, qualify their needs, and qualify if the Saasu system or any other system you're recommending can do the job that the client wants. And the one thing that I always stipulate, and this comes from me as a consultant rather than a software salesperson, is that if the product is not right for the customer, do not install it. If it can't meet their needs, do not install it. I've worked in major US software companies as CFO across Asia Pacific, had some very large businesses under my portfolio, 9 countries, 300 staff, very complex operations, and I've been on the other end. I've been a buyer of software and services, and the one thing that you will always get when you deal and go out to market looking at software companies is you're going to get a sales guy and you're going to get an implementation guy. And the sales guy will promise you the world, get you to sign the contract, press hard because there's 3 copies. You've got to make sure everyone gets their carbon copy, and then they handball it over to the implementation team. And quite often that's where these things go off the rails, is that the salespeople promise stuff that the implementation team just cannot deliver on, and it's really frustrating. So when you're out there talking to your customers, you've got to understand your customer's business to a very deep level. Sholto, if you can kindly jump to the next slide. Okay, so what do I mean by qualify? Well, you need to know your customer's business inside out. Now, my personal view is, and it may not be a view shared by everyone on the call today, but my personal view is that having worked as a CFO running complex businesses, I understand how businesses operate, I understand how they're put together, and I have a hands-on commercial approach to building businesses and infrastructure around that. When you work in a CPA firm or a chartered firm, you can advise your client around all the tax strategies and all the tax minimization and the right structuring, and that's the role, and that's what they should be doing. But I do challenge the notion that a lot of CPAs and practicing chartered chaps don't necessarily know their customer's business inside out. And that's not a criticism of the industry, but it's more an observation about the typical or the traditional role that they have played. We've seen a very rapid rise recently in, a lot of the accounting firms are moving into this notion of outsourced CFO. And, there's little practice groups springing up all over the place, and there's some really good work being done. There's some wonderful work being done by various different firms. But unless you've been working as a CFO inside a business, you're not necessarily going to have that hands-on, coal-face understanding of what actually happens inside a business. So just keep that in mind when you're talking to your customers, that the more time you can spend in front of the customer, the better. Don't just talk to them about their tax return once a year. Don't talk to them about, audit services and things like that. Get out of the chair, go down to the client site, and actually walk through the shop floor. That's one of the big things that I do. I try and go out to see every single customer that I can that we engage with from a migration and implementation perspective. And the first thing I say to them before we even sit in the boardroom is say, take me through your business. And they look at me like I'm a bit mad. And they say, well, what do you mean? I said, well, let's go for a walk. Let's put our briefcase down here, put our iPads down here, take me for a walk through your business. Show me how the stuff works. Show me how the business happens. And that way, people, adults particularly, learn from a very visual perspective. And so by walking through the business and getting the client to take you through the business, you actually get a very physical feel and a very physical understanding as to how they actually operate and run their business. And that then gives you a step forward, or you're sort of 1 foot ahead to then actually be able to understand, and you think about, yeah, okay, I remember going through here, and this document went through this process, or this happened, and that's how that translates back into the accounting system. So by doing that, you'll be on a much better front foot when you're going to talk to your customers about migrating across to Saasu, or any system for that matter.
Martin, can I just jump in and say it's a very short session this time around, half hour, so I know we've got a fair few slides to get through, so...
Yep, no worries. So I'll
get
going a bit faster.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, you need to show a genuine interest in your client's needs. Know your personal limitations. So be aware of what you can and can't do. That's pretty elementary. That's kind of 101. Don't promise if you can't deliver. So if you think you may not be able to get the system to do what you want, don't say it. Be transparent, open and honest with your customer. And don't fall foul to the sales budget or a sales target. So, you know, we don't have sales budgets inside my CFO. We don't have sales budgets inside Saasu. We do what we do. We get calls. We talk to customers. We fix their problems. But we don't set sales targets. And therefore, we don't have this internal culture of, you know, keep trying to just sell software for the sake of it. And you need to speak with authority and conviction. So when you're going into a client, go in there, be confident, understand what you're talking about, understand the client's business, and above all, don't act like a salesperson. Be genuinely interested in what they're doing. Okay? Next slide, please, Sholto. Thank you. Okay, so we have what we define as the 3 levels of migration, and we put this in our proposals to our clients. There's the historical transactions, there's the trial balance migration, and then the rollover date migration. If you just jump through, I'll show the audience what that looks like. Okay, so what I've got up here is a slide around pros and cons of each type of migration exercise. Under the historical, this one is the most expensive. You have to bring across every single transaction inside their existing system and put that into Saasu. Now, like all accounting systems, there are some things you can do to automate some of these processes. And so, you know, there's obviously some pros and cons there. On the pros, you know, you're going to historically have all of your transactions inside Saasu, so you can refer back to that. That's a really good thing to be able to look at. You'll be able to also have a thorough review of their business by doing the historical process. So you actually go through their business, look at their transactions, and understand how they're operating. So it will give you quite a deep view of their business as well. Some of the cons on this side is that it's very labor intensive to run this. It's the most complex method of migrating across to Saasu, or in any system for that matter, and you have to rebuild the system from scratch. So payroll has to be re-entered. You've got to rekey every transaction in. You can pull across your accounts payable and accounts receivable, your sales and purchases invoices, but again, you have to allocate the payments manually. So there's a lot of manual work that you have to do to get this one across the line, and it's a T&M business, and you have to price it accordingly. I would suggest out of every 100 migrations that we do, there might be 3 or 4 that want it, the full historical, you know, the full multi coming across. It's very low, the number of clients that want to engage under that model, and most of them are all going to have access to their MYOB file anyway. So we actually discourage our clients from going down that path for a variety of reasons. The trial balance migration process is by far the most popular.
Muted.
We take the trial balance at a certain date, so it might be, you know, 1 July 11, and then we take the trial balance, and it's great having a bunch of accountants on the call because I can sort of use the techo term debits and credits, and they understand what I'm talking about. You can take the TB at say 1 July, and then you can take the movements for each month from July through till now, and then you can load the movements into Saasu. So that's all of your whole trial balance movements for your P&L and your balance sheet. And what it actually enables your client to do, or the customer, is to run a historical P&L and balance sheet for each month. So it's quite nice. It gives them historical reporting information, but it doesn't give them historical transactions. And that's okay because they can usually refer back to their systems to get that information out. And then the fastest and most cost-effective method is obviously the rollover date. So you take my system at 1 April and take a trial balance and all the subledgers attached to that for AP and AR, and you load that up into Saasu. It's a fast, cost-effective way of getting information into Saasu. You can use your upload CSV spreadsheets at a summary level to pull that information in. You can minimize your costs to the clients. Some of the cons on that side is that, you know, there's obviously some degree of detail of transfer. So, you know, you have to decide in the information coming across if you want to put in summary or detail information, and there's a little bit more manual work there around that as well through your spreadsheet uploads. Sholto, next slide, please. So typically the price range that we charge customers, and you know, I know there's certainly other vendors out there doing all sorts of different pricing. That's the nature of a healthy competitive market, and that's how it should be. We pitch ourselves in the marketplace as being, you know, the forefront or the 4 leaders in this space, and that's reflected in our price. We work with a smaller number of clients and charge, you know, a little bit more money than some of the other vendors will charge, but we also provide with that consulting services that comes with, you know, 15 years of experience of being a CFO across many types of industries. So that's kind of our point of difference in the marketplace. And I know there's other vendors out there that do substantially cheaper things, but typically speaking, you know, if you to run a historical migration, you'd be looking at $4,500 entry point and above. Trial balance is typically $1,500 and above, and again, it depends if they want to go back 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and we price that accordingly. And then the rollover date can typically vary from, you know, $750 through to $3,000. So that's just a bit of a snapshot into our world and how we operate and the way we price things. Next slide, please, Sholto. Okay, so when migrating across, and I think we've got about 5 minutes left to go before questions and answers at 1 p.m. So I'll jump through some of these issues. So things that we see that go wrong in a lot of the migrations that we've dealt with is, whilst some of the other vendors understand cash and accruals from a GST perspective, they don't necessarily have an understanding of how that translates into migrating information into an accounting system. And the way that you migrate data across in Saasu is very dependent on whether your client is cash or accruals for GST. That posts through, or that has a flow-on effect into the way you record the transaction and the invoices that you're migrating across at a particular date. So sales invoices and purchase invoices have to be recorded and captured in a particular way because of that. Under payroll, some of the other tricks and traps that we see people fall foul to is around superannuation. Now, Saasu as a system doesn't have control accounts as you would know them for SGC Super, whereas in systems like MYOB, you will have a control account where you can post to. It has a control account, but it's a standard SGC Super account. What you can do is you can create those control accounts inside Saasu, and so you have 2 options there to either post to your generic super control account in your liability section of your balance sheet, or you can also create a super fund control account. So you might have AMP, Lend Lease, you know, Host, Rest, and they're all set up as actual accounts on your balance sheet. And that way you can post directly to those, and it does make your balance sheet very long, or can do, if you're paying to a lot of super funds, but you can at least see the liability that you're incurring for each super fund as soon as you pick up your balance sheet. So it's quite a nice thing to do as well. Inventory exports, a lot of clients get a bit frustrated because they say, look, you know, we have 500 stock items, we don't really understand, you know, what if we have to update our price list? This is terrible, we've got to go through every single one. You actually don't. You can export your inventory list out of Saasu, update your price list in Excel in a CSV spreadsheet, and then load that back in. So these are sort of little tips and tricks for doing efficient, fast migrations around some of the different areas. Now, one of the major problems that we come across is we say to the clients, you know, does your MYOB file agree to your bank statements? In 99.9% of cases, I say, oh yes, bank records are done, and they all agree. And at face value, prima facie, we take that as being accurate and correct. But in the vast majority of cases where the migrations do go off the rails, is because the business has trusted their former bookkeeper to be doing the right thing, and when we get in and have a look, we discover very, very quickly that the bookkeeper has not been doing the right thing and they don't balance. And that then creates a big problem for the client, because we have to go back and figure out, where it's gone off the rails. And it can be very, very costly. I mean, we've just completed an exercise for a client which we spent about 2.5 weeks rebuilding and fixing their file because they had some issues inside their business. So, at expensive consulting rates, it can cost them a lot of money. And that is a data cleansing exercise as opposed to a data migration exercise, and there is a difference. You just need to be aware of those two types of terms that we use. Data migration is where it's all clean and everything's fine. You bring it across and everything works smoothly. Data cleansing is when it turns into a bit of a disaster because the client doesn't really know what's going on inside the business. We see a bit of incorrect coding around GST as well. That's one of the other issues we often pick up. One of the other big areas that we identify is in the balance sheet, general ledger compared to the subledger.
Unmuted.
And you'll find that clients are posting entries direct to the GL, so to AR and AP control accounts, and that will then cause their subledger to be out. So we see that a lot. So these are the types of things that when you're going to assess, how much should I be charging this customer for the migration services, run these basic tests, run these simple tests and have a look, and that will then tell you if their MYOB file is clean or if it's going to be a disaster. And look, this isn't, these projects are not for the faint-hearted. You need to know what you're doing, you need to do this regularly, and you need to understand how to do this. And you need to know the right questions to ask in order to get the right answers out of the customer. And then obviously posting to wrong bank accounts, we're seeing that a fair bit as well. Okay, Sholto, next slide please. Okay, so we also get a lot of questions around where doesn't Saasu work? Or what's the best environment for Saasu? I tend to take this from the other angle and say, well, these are the environments it doesn't work in. If you have greater than 1,000 employees, the system is probably not right for you. But up to 1,000 employees, we can handle that very nicely. If your client has greater than 10,000 stock items, now this is an interesting concept. The SQL database that Saasu sits across can easily handle more than 10,000 stock items, not a problem. Where it creates issues is if you run a report to generate all of those 10,000 stock items, the web browsers, whether it be Internet Explorer, Google, Firefox, Safari, Chrome, whatever system you're running, the web browsers can't cope with that and they time out, and then it looks like the system has crashed. We are in the process of building some reports to fix that, and we'll be building what we call tabling, so that I think most people will be familiar with that. When you run a report, you get 20 on the screen or 100 on the screen, and then you click the pages to go through to the next one. So we're addressing that, and that's on its way. But today, if you had more than 10,000 stock items, we'd recommend that you actually don't use Saasu at the moment. But once we do that paging product update, then we'd love to have you as a customer. Next slide, please, Sholto. Okay, so the types of standard questions that we get. Where is our data stored? Well, as I showed you earlier, we use Rackspace in the US in Chicago, world-class data center. When you put a transaction into Saasu, there's a real-time replication and backup copy taken of that transaction. And then at a 15-minute interval level, we then do a full system backup to Hong Kong. At 30 minutes, we do a full system backup to Australia. 45 minutes, full system backup to Australia again. And then on the hour, we're back to the US. So I would challenge anyone using the traditional software methods like MYOB or QuickBooks or any of those other installed systems to show me where anyone is doing real-time backups. I know they're not. So again, this is one of the major reasons why you should be moving to cloud accounting. Because you've got this phenomenal infrastructure behind you, which you typically wouldn't have in your business running down, wherever your clients run their businesses. The other sort of questions we get are, can I access my data if I want to leave Saasu? And the answer is yes, absolutely. You own the data, we don't. So you're very welcome to have that data back. If you're so aggrieved, or the customer is so aggrieved and they no longer want to work with Saasu, we're not going to do anything to upset the relationship any further. We'll let them have their transactions. You can export your transactions out of Saasu at any point in time. Through most screens you can do that. Backups, I've just described how that happens. Who has access to the source code? That's another, being a private company, that's another question that we get a lot from the enterprise clients that I work with. The source code is held by our solicitors or our attorneys in what we call a escrow. So if anything did happen to the business, the various administrators or receivers or whatever they are would come in and take control and have access to the source code. We always get the question, who owns Saasu? We don't know a lot about you. What can you tell us about it? Well, we're a privately owned company, self-funded, privately funded. We haven't done any public or major capital raising. We've all invested our own money into the business. The business is cash flow positive, and we don't have any debt in the business. There are I think we've got about 7 of us that are shareholders, and those 7 shareholders all work together. We make decisions collectively. We have a regular board meeting, and we understand what's happening in the business. We all know what's going on inside our business. A lot of people often say, oh, we haven't heard of Saasu, who are you, sort of thing. Yes, that's a fair observation in the marketplace. We have not done a lot of marketing in terms of the products because, as I said earlier, we are technologists at heart, and we prefer to invest our hard-earned money into the products and into the back-end systems that drive Saasu. So, you get companies like NetSuite, who are listed on the US Stock Exchange, Xero, who's listed on the NZ Stock Exchange. They're spending a phenomenal amount of money of shareholders' funds on marketing, and we're really happy that they're doing that because they're raising awareness around cloud computing. They're letting everyone know what's going on, and I can guarantee you that if anyone is looking to assess a cloud computing solution, they look at NetSuite, not in necessarily any order, but they look at NetSuite, Xero, and Saasu. And then they'll make a decision between the 3 of those. So the more marketing that Xero and NetSuite do, we're very happy with that, because that means we can invest our money in the product and not invest it in marketing. And who else is using Saasu? We always get that question, and I showed you some of the household names earlier in